Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Sales Entrepreneur Podcast. I am Daniel McOmber, and today I have a completely different episode for you guys. A couple weeks ago, I had the chance to be on Jimmy Rex's We're the They podcast as a guest. And because we talked so much about why I started this podcast and why I started the brand, The Sales Entrepreneur, I decided to include it on my platform for you guys to listen as well. At the beginning of this episode, you're going to hear me talk a lot about the men's coaching group, We're the They. Ultimately, it leads to the story of why I started this podcast and why I started this brand. It's all relevant and it's all amazing. The cool thing is that you'll hear me talk about the goals and aspirations I have for this podcast and this brand. And so I hope that you guys really just enjoy the beginnings of this podcast and why I started it. So please enjoy episode number 19 with me as the guest.
So we have Dan in the building. He is the host of the Sales Entrepreneur Podcast. And so we wanted to have him on. That way we could do a little dual podcast. So first off, appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, man.
Second off, you ready to do this?
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah.
We don't really know what we're getting ourselves into, but we're going to figure it out. So
That's right.
So let's start off this way. In true We Are the They fashion, let's hear your Watt story, how you got involved with Watt, how you found out about it, and then why you led to the decision of joining.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's funny. A lot of people know about like the tribe and that kind of part about We Are the They, and they get introduced to that. I didn't know anything about that. Back in 2021, I had sold a property. And at that time I was making a transition. I was doing door-to-door like summer sales.
Yeah.
And I knew I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I just sold a property, had a pretty big influx of money. I'm like, I want to figure out something else to do.
Yeah.
So I hit up Jimmy Rex because I had done some Airbnb arbitrage up at that point, and I owned an Airbnb, and I was loving it. I'm like, I wonder if Jimmy would want to like partner on an Airbnb project or something. Yeah. And I also knew that I wanted to get him to know him better, and I figured I'm like, you know what, this would be a good opportunity like me to network. Get to know him. So I said, hey, can we grab lunch? I want to buy a property and maybe do something. So we're eating lunch, and I'm like, I finally just kind of told him, like, dude, I'll be honest, like right now I'm in a huge transition period in my life where I'm just trying to figure, I don't need like money, but I'm trying to figure out something I want to do. And he's like, all right, well, let's kind of like, let's brainstorm a little bit, you know, in true Jimmy fashion. He's trying to like help me out. And I guess I should say, we didn't know that each other were looking in an Airbnb space before that lunch.
Oh,
I hit him up to like maybe just buy a property, buy an Airbnb. I didn't know he was interested in it at all.
Yeah.
But then he said, oh, I'm actually looking for someone to help me with Airbnbs. Now, this is at the end of 2021. And that it was right when Jimmy was starting We're the They.
Yeah.
I think I have my timelines right on that.
Yeah, that
right?
would have been, Yeah.
So he was about to start it. And anyways, we're talking. He's like, well, he was trying to find an Airbnb guy because he wanted to invest in them. And at that point, the market was really good. And so we agreed on the idea, like, okay, cool. Like, let's do Airbnbs together. I'll do all the legwork. You can help bring the money.
Yeah, exactly.
So we had that idea. And then on top of that, I'm like, well, Jimmy, I kind of wanted the lunch day to find a property, but we didn't talk about that at all. He's like, yeah, I know. I'm like, well, I'm trying to find investments. And he's like, well, have you ever thought about investing like a business?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I love that idea. I think of myself as an entrepreneur. To that point, I had done a couple things, and I had never invested in a business before other than my own.
Yeah.
And he had an opportunity. And so I ended up saying, okay, cool, sign me up. Let's go. And I think like 2 weeks later, I ended up writing like a pretty huge check and investing with him. So after one lunch with Jimmy, I invested in some private businesses, signed up to do like investment real estate with him. And
committed to run all of his Airbnb properties.
Pretty much, yeah. We were trying to find some Airbnb properties together. So much came out of that lunch. I'm like, this guy is awesome. Like, I'm making moves, right? Well, in true fashion, the market was like just started doing terrible interest rates and stuff like that. So it just didn't really work out. And he did hit me up. He's like, hey, I'm doing this coaching thing. And he kind of told me a little bit about the We're the They. But after a couple months after we met, the Airbnb stuff wasn't working out. I did invest, like I said, with him in those businesses.
Yeah, of course.
But it was just difficult because I was trying to figure out what to do. And ultimately I ended up moving to Texas, moving to Fort Worth with my wife. It's something we'd always wanted to do. Found a job, found like a partnership down there. And so it just wasn't good timing.
Yeah.
Like I loved the idea of the group that he was talking about, but he also didn't know exactly what it was going to be.
What it was, yeah.
Yeah, he says that all the time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He has no clue what Group 1 was going to turn into.
And so when he was pitching it to me, I was like, sounds great, I think. Like, do you know it sounds great?
Yeah, it's almost like your friend who's like little high where it's like half-baked ideas, right?
Dude, it's going to be amazing.
You're just,
trust me.
You're just throwing stuff out there, seeing what sticks.
Yeah. So I didn't go with Group 1, moved to Texas. I saw how amazing it was and everything.
Yeah.
And then, again, I didn't know anything about the tribe at that point. But then Group 2 came out, saw it was awesome, but I was in full swing. I'm a part owner in a solar company, a very small part owner in a solar company down in Texas. And we were like just taking off, and I was investing all my time into that. So then Group 3 was kind of the private thing, and I was waiting because Group 3 wasn't open to everybody. So
it was.
I was really open to the idea of doing it by that point because I'd become a lot more stable in my job and whatnot. So when Group 4 came out, me and him were talking about something else. He's like, "Oh, dude, Group 4 is opening up in a week." I'm like, "Yep, sign me up."
Perfect.
So I knew that at that point I wanted to come back to Utah more anyways. I already was coming back here pretty often.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll make it work.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's awesome because I know I was coming out to Utah fairly frequently for work when I first started, working with people out here. So you kind of get out here, you got to get around the people, you kind of get used to it, right? Like I'm sure that you were used to it. It's an interesting almost what if project with you too, right? Like what if you joined Group 1,
Yeah.
Would you have ever moved, you would have stayed in Utah, joined Group 1, would have been crazy. So
yeah,
it's interesting
absolutely.
to think about.
I think about that all the time.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, that's a good story, man. I appreciate you sharing. Let's talk about your podcast then, because I know it ties into a lot of the why, because that's kind of the how you got into Watt.
Yeah.
And now let's dive into the why a little bit more.
Okay.
Share a little bit about why you joined Watt and how that kind of ties into you starting the Sales Entrepreneur podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole idea of networking in a positive way outside of the sales world was something that just drew me to With the Day.
Yeah.
Because I've been in sales for 9 years, almost 10 years now. And it's been really difficult. I'm also really loyal. So I've been with the same group for 8 of those 9 years.
And that's rare in the airspace.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so even though we left the company, we stayed together. We now live on the same street, a couple doors down. And I love those guys, but it's so different because we work together.
Exactly.
And because I didn't bounce around, I actually did not get to know a lot of people in the door-to-door space.
Wow.
Because I was just so much with the people that I was with.
Exactly.
And so going to BYU, living in Utah, you would think that I had a bigger network, and I didn't. And I realized man, I kind of blew that during those times. I was too focused. I kind of assumed the identity of the company I was working with a little bit too, and alienated people who weren't a part of that company a little bit. And I realized man, there's so many good people out there, regardless of what company they're with. And I also had a lot of bad experiences where I would try to, towards the end of my time doing summer sales, I was trying to meet other people, and it just turned into a recruiting thing, right?
Yeah.
People hear about that all the time. And,
Exactly.
And, I know they all meant well, but at the same time, my goal was something bigger than that. I was trying to create relationships.
Yeah. In that summer sales space, you're not able to create that, right? You're talking to a bunch of different people, but it's just going out recruiting them, trying to get them apart, right? It's very
it makes
quick.
sense too, because you have a limited amount of time that you can spend with somebody other than your family, for example.
100%.
If you ask an adult male, hey, how much do you hang out with your friends? They're not going to have an amazing answer. I spend 6 hours a week with my friends. It's no. But if they're really truly good friends, you can spend 1 hour every 3 to 4 weeks.
Exactly.
And it feels like you're picking up right where you left off.
Yeah.
And I did not have that kind of a relationship. I had some best friends from high school, but I wanted more. And so when Jimmy talked about this, I'll be honest, I didn't join With the Day for Jimmy Rex.
Yeah.
And I joined it for the idea of the group of 50 men.
Of course.
And he knows that.
Yeah.
And I should say, I knew that Jimmy Rex would bring 49 other guys to the group that were, I guess, worth getting to know and worth being really good friends, and who also had the same mentality, or at least I hope that I had going into it, right?
That makes sense.
It's like, I don't want to call it, it's almost like speed dating. It's like everyone's there for the same reason, hopefully, right? They're supposed to be, and you get to know a lot of people.
I don't know. That first day in Moab definitely felt like a little speed.
You got name tags on, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, hey, my name's Daniel, and yeah, this is why you should love me.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%.
So that was kind of the main idea that pulled me into We're the They. Is I just wanted more meaningful relationships with people outside of the sales organization.
Yeah, of course.
And the cool thing is that I had heard other We're the They guys from previous groups talk about, oh, like I found my best friend, lifelong friend.
Yeah.
That was the one part that almost kind of threw me off. I was like, come on, really?
Yeah.
Like I was very skeptical about that. But yeah, I've got a couple guys in our group it's just like, what? Instant connections.
Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, lifelong friends. So
Yeah.
it's been more than I ever could have anticipated.
Yeah.
So those were the original thoughts and feelings of why I wanted to join.
Exactly.
Now, what's happened since then is like kind of a little different.
Yeah. So let's dive into that part because I think it's an interesting transition into. A lot of us have gone through changes since our first Ludus and Moab, right?
Yeah.
I think yours are very noticeable, and I think part of that comes from the Sales Entrepreneur brand and the podcast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So dive into a little bit more about that. What from leaving Moab, what was that near the end of December, right?
Yeah.
Leaving Moab, going on to what you are doing now. How has that kind of led you down this path and where you are now?
Yeah. So the second reason why I wanted to join We're the They, and the main reason what fueled me getting to the podcast and where I am now, is the original reason why I met Jimmy and connected with him so well. It was I was looking for fulfillment desperately.
Yeah.
That I wasn't getting through door-to-door sales, period. That's why you don't see me wearing a lot of my company stuff. You don't hear me ever talking about work. Because work gives me very little fulfillment.
Yeah, exactly.
Period.
Yeah.
It gives me money, time freedom. Awesome. I leverage that to do other things.
And that's something you see pretty consistently in the door-to-door space, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I've gone through these troubles in my own life where I'm seeking fulfillment. And so I'm going into Moab and I have that amazing experience. And Moab helped me realize, okay, hey, Dan, maybe before you start thinking too much into finding things that'll fulfill you, fix your crap first.
Yeah.
So after Moab, I put a lot of work and effort, still am, into fixing my bull crap that I brought with me. And that really, it was crazy. I didn't realize that was a necessary first step.
Yeah.
I went into this thinking I didn't have much to work on, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
In hindsight. So once I kind of cleared up my mind with all this junk that I had in there, and my relationship with my wife and got my priorities set, I was like, okay, cool. Now I feel like I'm in a great mindset to go find something that's fulfilling.
Yeah, of course.
Now, it's a pretty cool story, actually. So a couple months, like I think it was back in February, March, I'm talking with Jimmy on the phone. One of our, the morning walks that he does, me and him just do a phone call, right? And so I called Jimmy Rex and I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about starting like a window business because my buddy is doing it and I want to be an entrepreneur so bad.
Yeah.
Because I'm not necessarily an entrepreneur at the company I'm at right now. I'm more of like an entrepreneur, right?
Makes sense.
I have stock in the company. I have what my say does go a long way, but I'm not an owner. It's a huge company.
Of course.
I'm not a CEO or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, like I've done entrepreneurial things in the past. I want to do them in the future. Maybe I'll start a window company with my buddy. He says it's easy, but it's kind of hard. And Jimmy was just kind of laughing and he was kind of like letting me talk. He could tell I wasn't in it. I don't want to start a window company. I'm like, I just want to be, well, he's like, Dan, have you ever like created a company and then sold it? I'm like, no, I've created a couple companies and they didn't work. They failed, frankly. And he's like, okay, so you're not like an entrepreneur like that. So like, don't try to be something you're not.
Yeah.
He's like, you're good at sales, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm amazing at sales. I can own up to that. He's like, okay, don't leave something that you're really good at for something that is a potential or maybe, or searching for something that is, I don't know, like sounds sexier.
Yeah, of
right?
course. Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. He's like, why don't you just kind of like embrace what you are and leverage it to become something even better? And I loved that idea. So we had a pretty long chat and it's the first time I've ever like journaled, but I had this intuition. I'm like, I feel like I need to go like journal, write this down. So I went into my room at my office kind of by myself. I got a pen and paper and I started writing things down. I'm like, this is the chat I had with Jimmy, and I'm kind of like recapping, and then ideas are coming. I'm like, well, I'm great at sales. I'm in sales. I don't plan on leaving sales anytime soon because of the position I'm at. It's going to be really good for a while.
Exactly.
And I want to be an entrepreneur. I could do entrepreneurial side things on the side. Why don't I just be a salesman and an entrepreneur? Oh, how about the sales entrepreneur, right?
There it is, yep.
And so that was where the name came about. And then it was literally a couple days later that I was like, hey, what am I going to do with this sort of idea, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, and it's so funny. If you were to ask me back in January, like, hey, Dan, like, you're going to start a podcast in a couple months, I would laugh. I'm like, what would I talk about? What do you talk like?
Yeah.
So, but I realized, I'm like, if I do a podcast, I can meet entrepreneurs, interview them, and get to know their stories and learn myself about what I eventually want to do.
Yeah.
It's almost like the podcast is literally just myself asking the questions I want to ask entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
Getting to know the guys who have done what I want to do. And of course, the benefit for everybody else is like, hey, I'm going to post this. I'm going to pay a good amount of money to make this happen. And I'm going to post it so that way I can help other people who are in my shoes.
Yeah. I love that.
That was kind of the idea of how it all started. And the crazy thing is, to tie it back to We Are the They.
Yep.
No way I could have done this without the support from Jimmy and the group.
Yeah.
I had this idea and I started building on it. And I was so excited. We had a Ludus, the one here in Utah, 2 weeks later after that phone call. I show up and I start talking to Corey, Brad, guys in our group. I'm like, I'm starting a podcast.
Yeah.
I've already decided this is what it is. And like, oh, cool. And I could tell like they're like, but I was so passionate about it. I'm like, it's happening.
Every time someone says I'm starting a podcast, they go to their friends and they go, oh yeah, cool. That's awesome.
But I was so enthusiastic about it. I'm like, let's go. And then Corey and Brad are like, oh, we actually own a podcast studio. I'm like,
yep,
let's go. Literally, it's hilarious. By the end of the Ludus, me and Corey planned to record in his studio before I flew out.
Perfect.
And so it's funny, we didn't air that one. We re-recorded it because Corey's voice was completely gone because we had been talking so much that week.
Yeah. And the Ludus on top of it. Yeah.
At the Ludus, yeah.
Exactly.
So we were at the Ludus. We were talking so much. We were tired. And so we recorded, and the rest is kind of history. But without the confidence from Brad, Corey, oh my gosh, how many phone calls did we have where I was like, Nick, how do I do this?
Yeah,
like,
we had a couple.
What am I doing here? Like, how do you do that? Yeah. And so I would not have been able to have the confidence to do this because I never had a group of guys who knew me, understood what I wanted and where my core values were.
Yeah.
And supported it like just kind of faithfully.
Yeah, of course. And it's special, right? Because in the podcasting world, you don't get a lot of that. You don't get a lot of support. No. You really don't. Trust me, I've been doing this for a decade now. Like, I can't tell you the amount of podcasts that I've done, that I've put out, that I've like begged people to listen to that just hasn't gone anywhere, right? Yeah. Like I have, you're an entrepreneur and you say your business has failed. That was me for my podcast, right? Yeah. Can't tell you the amount of podcasts that I've had.
Yeah.
And so like for me to even be able to, and getting a little personal here, for me to be able to take those phone calls and to be able to walk you through that and help you. I mean, I've now been able to help you, Nick Bryant, Richard Hatch. Like, wow. I've been able to help a lot of people with my expertise. And it's something that I never really imagined in podcasting when I started when I was 16 years old.
Yeah.
It was just, hey, I want to start a podcast and talk about it, right? So it's been special to see. Mm-hmm. And so the question that I have for you, because I know the answer to this. Okay. I've been doing this for a long time. But why a podcast? Why not anything else? Why not just, go have lunch with these guys or do anything like that?
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is that in networking, right? If you want to network with high level individuals, you have to find a way to give them some value.
Exactly.
And I was like, hey, and it's so funny. I had a guy on the other day who's a venture capitalist, and he was talking about this. He's like, hey, I have people who hit me up and say, let me take you to lunch and pitch you my idea. He gets thousands a week. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine the kind of people that I was trying to reach out to were getting tons of that.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, how can I add value to people? I'm like, well, if I pay to rent out a studio and invite them in. And then I let them know, hey, I'm going to pay to create all of these like reels and social media stuff around it for you. Now, it's funny, before the collaborate feature came out on Instagram, my plan was to literally just send them the video and say, hey, you could post this on your Instagram.
Yeah, have them do everything.
Exactly. Which would have meant that my page would have gotten probably crap like following or anything like that. Cause that was my plan. I was like, hey, I'll pay for an editor to edit these and you can just have them.
Yeah.
And that was the way I found that I could give value to people.
Exactly.
And, you know, being in sales for a really long time, I'm really good at asking questions.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I just had this really strong inkling that, or intuition that I'm like, I bet I'd be able to do this pretty well.
Yeah.
And so that confidence was there. I'll tell you what, though, the confidence that wasn't there is the social media stuff.
Yeah.
That was what scared me. And frankly, that's what always kind of held me back from doing anything like this or putting myself out there, was just because it's something that I've never understood. And then also, you know, a lot of insecurities like come out with that. Like I unfortunately care quite a bit about what people think about me. Yeah. It's something I'm working on, but it's something that it was always something that happened with me. I just cared a lot about my appearance and things. Yeah. And so it's been awesome to kind of break those walls down, which is a result I did not expect from this.
Exactly. And it's, there's two parts to what you just said there, right? The first part, the social media, it's something that's new, right? Like TikTok wasn't around when podcasts first started. And so now it's hey, how do I balance between what's actually a podcast and what's just, hey, we look cool in a studio and we just record clips, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of ones out there. And so it's a completely different craft to record, edit, post a good podcast and just sit down in front of microphones in a studio and get clips for 15 seconds. Yeah,
because me and you could sit there and talk. I mean, we could pull a Joe Rogan and we could sit here for 3 hours and just talk about anything that comes to our minds.
Exactly.
And have fun with it and have some kind of direction, maybe. And then just edit the crap out of it at the end. Yeah. But there's something raw about a podcast as well that I really liked. I'm like, hey, if I can get somebody in here, and this is kind of my goal behind every podcast, by the way, is like, you know, at the beginning, it's kind of, I don't want to say scripted, but it's a little bit like they kind of know basic questions we're going to ask them at the beginning. And they know maybe a lot of guests prepare what they're going to say before they come.
Exactly.
I tried not to do that, by the way, today, but even still a little bit. What my goal is like, okay, I want to, you know, ask them basic level questions and stuff like that. And I want to ramp up the questions. I want to get them to a place where they're thinking and something kind of vulnerable can come out, something authentic can come out. Yeah. And I feel like that's where the value is added. Yeah. It's like, hey, we can sit here and we can script something all day long, and that would bring value to the guest I have on. I'm like, hey, we could script something that makes you sound amazing. Yeah. And then you could post it. Yeah. But something I liked, I'm like, how about I try to get something out of them that's not scripted, maybe they've never said before, and show them something. Or, I mean, I'll be honest, I talk out loud. Yeah. It drives my wife crazy sometimes. But like, I think out loud, I talk out loud. And so most of the time I come to the best realizations when I'm talking out loud. Yep. And sometimes I tell my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm just going to think out loud. And she just tones out. Yeah. But I'm talking, and I realize something. And because I do that, I figured, hey, I could probably facilitate that for other people.
Exactly. And it's important to have that sounding board, right? Like one of my best friends in this world, the reason that we became close friends is because I was able to bounce off of him super well, and he was able to bounce off of me super well. Yeah. Having that type of connection, it was like we were doing, and we did a podcast together, but that was beside the point. Like it was like we always did a podcast together, right? Yeah. It was always like we were bouncing off of each other, asking questions, being able to answer and going further. And so the second part of that is the value, right? Yeah. Like, you are bringing value to them, but you're also bringing value to yourself, right? You're taking in all this information, you're getting all this knowledge, and all it is just, hey, I want to have you on my podcast, come share your story, right? Like this is what I always tell people. I run a podcast studio for people who don't know, is anyone who comes in, it's not about trying to make money from your podcast. It's about trying to share what's necessary on a podcast to then turn that into the success that you have for the future, right? Yeah. And I'm sure your brand is very specific to that, right? Sales entrepreneurship, huge deal, right? Touch on that a little bit more. Like what do you get out of each and every episode that goes further into what your goal is and what your future plans are for business?
Yeah. No, I realized as well when I created the brand and that it's going to be a pretty niche market.
Yeah, it is.
Like the idea that I'm like talking to entrepreneurs and sales reps that call themselves entrepreneurs, because there's many of them that do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And for good reason. I think that there needs to be a little bit of an awakening to that.
Agreed.
I think that, again, I've just barely been put on to the term of entrepreneur myself. And I've realized that most 1099 contractors who are sales managers or regional managers or sales reps that kind of run their own business, run their own organization within an organization, they're entrepreneurs. And I think that if they embrace that term and recognize what it is and how they can extremely add value, be the best number two that a company has.
Agreed.
I think that it'll help these guys progress a lot better.
Yeah.
The funny thing is you can ask anybody, the number two always makes more money than number one.
Exactly.
Only in the rare cases that the entire company sells and everyone makes a lot of money.
Yeah.
But it's just crazy how often people overlook that, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a pretty niche market. And then, entrepreneurs as themselves, there's a lot of people who call themselves entrepreneurs that probably won't love all the recordings that I do because it's real entrepreneurism. It's not
exactly.
And I shouldn't say, I guess that's bad. It's not real. It's just the hard, gritty entrepreneurism. It's not zero money down, zero risk entrepreneurism.
It's just different. Like it just is.
It's just different. And so I knew that it was going to be kind of niche when I created this, but I was like, you know what? Let's be honest. Where I'm at, I've realized, okay, I can help sales guys because I know that industry in and out.
Yeah.
I can help entrepreneurs not because I'm a successful entrepreneur. I'm actually a failed entrepreneur with a couple of businesses.
Yeah.
I've had amazing investments into businesses, and those have all done fantastic, but not necessarily start my own. But because I've tried and failed, I know the lingo. I know what it takes. And so I knew that coupled with that knowledge of sales and the experience of entrepreneurism, that I could bring guests on and I could talk the talk.
Exactly.
And I could ask good questions that I know people in my position are going to want to hear.
Yeah.
And I knew that I'd be a really good person to facilitate the education and content that I want out there.
Yeah. Because
at the end of the day, I was like, man, when I transition out of sales, which is probably going to be a few years from now.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a venture capitalist. That's just what's going to happen. In some form or another. There's so many different kinds.
Yeah.
That's going to be a hard transition period for me. And so I'm like, if I can have this platform where I am educating entrepreneurs, I am promoting it, I have a great network of people who I'm going to be meeting, who I'm going to be interviewing.
Yeah.
Then when I turn around and I say, hey, I'm going to be starting a fund, bring your ideas to me. I have this amazing platform where I've met hundreds or if not thousands by that point of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I have this great education, and that's the idea.
Exactly.
I want to create that, and it's a little selfish, but I want to create that so that way when I do transition in the future, I have a platform and people are going to want to invest with me and my company because of the value that I provide.
Exactly. And it's interesting because you said like it's a little selfish, right?
Yeah.
Everything in this world can be a little bit selfish at the end of the day. So it's like if we're just recording a podcast and having a conversation, like what's to have us not do that in front of cameras, right? Like it's the exact same thing, right? Yeah. It's having a conversation with people. Yeah, you're putting it out to people. You're giving them just as much information as you're getting for yourself. Yeah. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, right?
Well, I've said this a couple of times on different podcasts, but in life, and I think I heard this from Chris Williamson, in life, you need to have a selfish reason and a selfless reason for everything you do. And if you think that you're doing something out of being just completely selfless, if you think that you're doing something and you're being completely selfless, then you're just trying to avoid the selfish reason why you're doing it. Giving to charity is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Now, the selfless reasons you're doing it are phenomenal.
Yeah.
And they far outweigh and they impact people more than the selfish reason of feeling good.
Exactly.
That's why it works.
Yeah.
Right. But there's a lot of things in life I feel like where people think that they're doing it for the selfless reasons.
Yeah.
And in actuality, no, you're really doing it for the selfish reasons.
Exactly.
There's
a saying out there and I'll let you continue your thought. There's a saying out there that there is no such thing as a completely selfless act, right?
Perfect. Exactly. Example.
Yeah.
And so I made sure while I was formulating this idea of starting a podcast that I had both.
Exactly.
I wanted to make sure I'm like, hey, this can't be a 100% selfish thing, because then what's the point? I'm not building something. If it's not helping other people, then is it really helping the people I'm bringing on? So I was like, yeah, okay, selfish reasons. I'm networking with amazing people.
Yeah.
And I'm getting educated in the process.
Exactly.
The selfless reasons are, hey, I get to help guys who are in my shoes or will be in my shoes. And I get to create some kind of camaraderie, some kind of place where, I'm going to rephrase that. I get to create a place where people can go and have proof that entrepreneurism works.
Exactly.
And that there's so many different types, and there's not just one way to be an entrepreneur. Because the thing is that you see all the top level brands. That's another goal of mine as well. I'm not here to interview all the top level brands.
No.
I'm here to interview all the guys and girls that are doing it, no matter what stage they're in. So today I had somebody on my podcast and he's killing it. The guy is so enthusiastic. It's phenomenal. I love his energy, and that's why I brought him on. His business is just getting started. It's only about 2 years old.
Wow.
But I didn't care. I'm like, dude, this is the perfect time to talk to you. And he actually asked me, he's like, are you sure you don't want to wait till like my business is more mature? I'm like, no. This is the perfect, I want to know what you're going through now.
Exactly. Every guest asks that question.
Yeah. Are you sure? Like, I'm like,
sure?
no, right now is the time. We can redo this in a couple of years when you made it big and everyone knows your name.
Look back on it. Yeah.
Exactly. But I'm like, dude, let's talk about what you're going through now, the highs and the lows, the hardships. I want to hear that.
Exactly.
Because if I can hear enough of it and I can get a good idea, well then, frankly, that's a way that, okay, when I go to start my own business, when I go to start funding other people's businesses, I've got so much knowledge from people who I've talked to and the downfalls. I have so many things I've learned from other people's mistakes.
Yeah.
And I have so many things I've learned from people's successes on the come up that's going to be the value.
Exactly. It's great. And like hearing your drive about it, just as someone who's been doing podcasts for so long, it's like, this is what people are looking for when it comes to podcasts, right? They're looking for people who are passionate about it, who care about what they're talking about. You clearly do, right?
Yeah.
And we'll dive into a little bit more about that later, but it's just so telling, right? There's so many podcasts out there that people just to start talking, right?
Yeah.
But when there's a reason behind it, when there's value being provided on both sides, that's where it's so important. So sales entrepreneurship side a little bit more. I want to talk about your sales background, kind of talk to me how you got into sales, what led you to getting into the sales world as someone who comes from a different sales background myself, coming from, the more retail and corporate side of sales.
Yeah.
I understand that side of the grind. I want to hear about your kind of decision to get into the door-to-door space and kind of that side of things.
Yeah, my story is a familiar story.
Yeah.
Getting home from a LDS mission, my best friend's older brother was already in it.
Of course.
Now, it is interesting that I grew up most of my life in Utah, and I had never heard of summer sales or anything like that. I get home from my mission. I go out, and I was the only one who had any success in the entire office.
Oh, wow.
Like, even the veterans didn't have success, and it was make or break for me.
Yeah,
I was literally like, I need to do this and it needs to be successful, because like my parents at that point were like doing okay, but I'm like, I want to be on the lacrosse team.
Yeah.
Because that I played lacrosse. I want to play lacrosse. I want to do this, this, and this, and this. And I can't do that without money.
Exactly.
And this is an opportunity. It was very difficult though, because the company I was with had a bad reputation, which I didn't know about.
Oh, wow.
For not being very ethical. And that was very hard for me and my friends, because our manager was literally training us to lie.
Yeah.
Like dead serious correlation at the beginning of the day, training us bad sales techniques.
Yeah.
Now my dad, he's a retired FBI agent, but he was in sales at the time. He did public speaking sales. He's 6'8". He demands a presence. When he's on a stage, everyone listens. He's kind of like a Ed Milet, but like a foot taller.
Makes sense.
So the funny thing is that, and then he had also started something on his own too.
Yeah.
So he supported me. Actually, it wasn't like a story where I didn't have any support.
Yeah.
He supported me full heartedly. And there was a couple Saturdays when I'd call him and be in like tears almost because it was so hard. I felt so alone. And ultimately he just said like, train yourself, like figure it out pretty much. And so I trained myself and I didn't listen to anything those guys said, trained myself. That's the only reason why I was successful and everyone else failed because they're being taught to lie. So come home, switch companies, find, who I look at as more of a mentor now, and I've been with him ever since.
It's awesome.
And he literally like what he's known for is selling ethically.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, I want that. And so I hitched my boat to his wagon or to his whatever car, and I've been with him ever since actually. Yeah. So the cool thing is that getting into sales was pretty traditional in that aspect.
Yeah.
But it's funny, I kept trying to like prove almost like to myself and to other people that I could do more than just door-to-door sales.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I thought of myself as something more than that. And I don't know why I had that kind of like those thoughts and feels. They weren't healthy. I shouldn't have like been.
I think every sales guy has that kind of mindset, right?
It's true. And so I got married, did a few summers like that.
Yeah.
And again, just not like the money was fantastic. I'd come home and we'd be able to travel, which was nice. But what always drove me crazy was the recruiting game. And I hated the fact that like, hey, the way to make money, really good wealth money is recruiting.
Exactly.
Again, ever since the very beginning, I'd always wanted to build relationships with people.
Yeah.
And instead of recruiting. Now, some people will say, oh, the best way to do it to recruit is to build relationships first. I'm like, selfless reasons there.
Yeah.
Okay, no, you're lying to yourself.
Exactly.
If that's the way you say you recruit, which is great, but don't say that you build relationships first with no intention of recruiting.
Yeah.
You're lying to yourself about which one of those things is more strong, right? It's more of the selfish reasons. So anyways, I just had a struggle like with the environment and just like everything about it.
Yeah.
Never felt fulfilled. So I started like little things. My uncle knew that I was kind of interested in it, and you know how right now when you go on LinkedIn, you can go to your inbox and you have 1 billion spams.
Yeah, exactly.
Anytime you friend someone, spam.
Yep.
So that didn't always exist, right? About in 2019 is when software started coming out with that kind of technology. 2018.
Yep.
The early movies were like 2015, but that's like one or two companies.
Yeah.
Well, him and a friend, the friend had developed the software to do that. And the idea was, and they came to me about it, like say, hey, what if we use this tool where it'll automatically send not friend requests, but connection requests to a very targeted person, like a potential sales rep.
Exactly.
And we can use it as recruiting. And well, I guess that was my idea for the software that they had. I'm like, hey, we can use it as recruiting. And, that's a way for me to recruit without trying to like fake a relationship.
Exactly.
It's just completely transactional.
It's quick, easy. It makes sense, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like, hey, I'm only reaching out to you for one reason alone. And this is transactional, right? And so it was great until it wasn't. We were killing it. And all of a sudden the software guy, who was the key piece of everything, I mean, within the first couple months, I had brought on over, I think, $10,000 worth of clients because I knew who to call and I knew how I could get them on, and selling the software of the company was so easy.
Exactly.
And it was working great. And then I guess we went about like 5 months, and then the main guy with the software just decided that it wasn't for him. He was going through a really hard time with his family. So I guess I kind of say, but it fell off, and we tried to like white label a different company and that didn't work either. So it just went away.
But it was something that you tried, right?
Yeah, we tried it, right? And I learned so much in that process.
Exactly.
I won't go into all the details, but even from when I was in high school, I used to throw dance parties.
Nice.
With my friends being DJs, some of my friends providing the lights, and I would just advertise. I was just really good at like getting the word out there.
Yeah.
Because I love to dance, which sounds kind of funny, but I love electronic music and I love to dance.
Yeah.
And so I coupled them together with like a little business thing.
Yeah.
So
you were a young club promoter.
yeah. My goal, like in high school, I wanted to start a club.
Yeah.
I was like, I want to start a club. And then I realized you need alcohol to start a club. So that'll never work in Utah because the only way clubs make money is alcohol.
Exactly.
But the crazy thing is that I tried a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I mean, it all stems down to when I got home from my mission, I had this unquenchable desire to be successful and to be creative. And so that was the biggest thing, is that my creative juices just weren't firing. I couldn't figure something out just on the sales side of things. So that was the bigger one.
Yeah.
I did a couple of like small projects partner with some friends. And ultimately what always happened is one or two of the partners just didn't see the vision anymore and flopped out. And because it was never my vision, it was tough because I was just kind of like, I came into somebody else's vision.
Yeah.
And then either that person like left or something happened. So the one time it was my vision is when I did that. I kind of went back to my high school roots. I started this little
club.
I started this little dance company called The Thrill. And the idea of it was that we were going to go to businesses and say, hey, use my company as like an advertising and marketing device to bring people into your space. And we'll hold a huge dance party in your space.
Interesting.
You can advertise. And so we did. We held an event at Guru's Cafe in Provo.
That's sick.
I saw all the pictures from it and everything. And it was we only had like 5 events, but that was our first and biggest event.
Yeah.
And it worked. The funny thing is that
awesome.
I lost money on it because I didn't charge anybody. I just wanted a sick dance party. I wanted to work. So anyways, it's funny how easy it was to get so many people on board when it was my vision.
Yeah.
And so I realized at that point, like, okay, I probably am going to be very wary of joining another entrepreneurial venture unless it's my vision.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people would call me and reach out to me, ask me if I want to do something. But because I learned those lessons, like, no, like I'm not sold enough on that vision. Or I told one guy, I'm like, I don't think you're sold enough on the vision. I don't think that like it makes sense for me to come in.
That's very real. Yeah.
So since I've been focusing so much on the sales aspect, that's what happens as well when you have a wife and kids, right?
Exactly.
And because I learned that lesson that I didn't want to join other people's visions, I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to take a step back from the idea of an entrepreneur, right? And so I took a step back from it for a long time. I embraced the entrepreneur route. But again, kind of going full circle, it got to the point before I met Jimmy, where a year before I met Jimmy, it was just clawing at me, itching at me. It had been a couple of years since I'd done anything. I filled that cup really well with real estate. Yeah. So I've done quite a few real estate deals that have all been fantastic. Awesome. And that was good. Not the same thing though. Yeah. And so, it just made sense when I met Jimmy and the connection was made and the route that he was going. I'm like, okay, I think this guy in this organization, this group, whether they is going to be a catalyst. It's going to help me get a good path or a good idea of where I can go and how I can get my creative and entrepreneurial mindset going again.
Well, and I love that too, because it's like that vision that you're talking about. You can put it on the back burner for so long, but eventually it always creeps back up, right?
Yeah, it does.
And it's something that I used to have a podcast where we interviewed a lot of, artists, like people who drew, people who sung, just any artist in any way, shape, or form, right? Like I just wanted creative minds. Yeah. And the mindset behind that was the creative process is something that's so fascinating to me because every person has their own individual creative process, right? Right. Like your creative process was so much more than just sales, right? Like for me, I was in sales for a long time and it's hard to be creative in sales, right? Like you get creative, you think of the things that you want to say, and then once they work, you stick with them and you don't think of anything else.
Exactly. Yeah. Right? Bingo. Yeah.
So being that creative mind, I always wanted to, have a podcast on the side. I always wanted to have something going to where that creative mind was always sticking in. It sounds like you pushed that down for so long that you had to get it back out. Did you feel like it started coming back out once you started kind of the entrepreneurship side of things, or do you feel like it's now starting to come out more with your podcast, or maybe a mix of both?
Yeah. So, I mean, with like when I was doing the entrepreneur things before, it was fantastic. The struggle back then is that I didn't see a long term with any of those things.
Of course.
Even the dance thing, there's no way. And that was always kind of like tough. It's like, hey, it's hard to be creative and commit yourself fully to something unless you can see a long term for it. And so the crazy thing is that what made this work so well with the podcast and this brand was I'm like, hey, I don't need to make money on it. I do not care to make any money off this podcast whatsoever or social media at all. I don't need, and that's not a driving factor. And I can still see a long-term play with this.
Exactly.
And that is what got me so excited and just got everything pumping again. I'm like, okay, I've realized like, because I talked to enough entrepreneurs that I realized, and they'd say this over and over again, if you're starting a company or a project because of the money, it's not going to work. And if it does work, it's not going to be fulfilling. And I'm like, okay, well, for the fulfillment is what I'm looking for. So
exactly.
That was what ultimately made it work, is when I realized as I was journaling that one night, when I was coming up with ideas, I'm like, holy crap, I have this idea that's self-serving and I can help so many people in the process and I can see a long-term and it is not dependent on money. That was the culmination of everything.
100%.
And the reason, one way that this podcast to me is more than a podcast as well is because again, it's this brand. It's the sales entrepreneur brand, right?
Exactly.
It's the idea is like, hey, are you in sales? Are you an entrepreneur? Great. This is for you kind of a thing. And that's kind of what I'm promoting. That's the idea I'm trying to create. What I'm also trying to do is I'm trying to be completely inclusive. And in a world that is extremely exclusive. Entrepreneurism can be very exclusive.
Very true.
Sales is 100% exclusive.
Very true.
And so in a world like that and like venture capitalism, the most exclusive thing you can think of.
Exactly.
And so in these worlds where it's very exclusive, I am an extremely inclusive person, always have been. I am like, this is something that can bridge the gap.
Exactly.
This is something where I can make a relationship with somebody, I can interview them, and they do not have to be concerned whatsoever about my interior motives. And that is a position I wanted to be in. And it's not a position everybody can be in. It's really tough.
No, it's not.
Because a lot of times when you're making relationships with people, they're going to wonder what your interior motive is. If it's got to be selfish, and is it completely like, is it going to be harmful? Is it something that's going to bite me in the butt later? Like, why does Nick want to have me on a podcast, right? So that was the idea, and I'm striving hard, and it's not easy. There's quite a lot of boundaries to break, but I've interviewed so many different kinds of people. I've done 20 interviews now, 20 podcasts, and they've been so different, and it's just my favorite part about it.
Exactly.
It's so different. Walks of life, the backgrounds. You have the most successful people who grew up wealthy to people who were drug addicts that built it from the ground up. That is what I wanted to embrace and well.
And it goes back to the core principle of podcasting, which is everyone has a story. Here's your platform to share it. Right?
I love that.
That is the core principle of podcasting. That's like
right.
101, right? It's so unique and special. And I want to talk more about the brand itself, but like the podcast itself, it's such a unique opportunity for you, and it's a unique opportunity for anyone, right? Like, I mean, I've had this opportunity for a long time now, so it's exciting to see, and it's exciting to see where it'll like continue to go, especially hearing your passion on it, right?
So, well, one thing about that too is that again, when you take the money out of the project, it opens up your eyes to so many amazing avenues and ways that you can take it.
Exactly.
So for me, because I'm not money reliant whatsoever, for example, I just got connected with a guy, multi-millionaire. The friend that connected us told me his story. Amazing story, crazy, awesome. Doesn't have an Instagram. If I was doing this podcast for money and monetary reasons only, I would probably not interview that guy.
Yeah, exactly. It wouldn't be worth it.
Right? Like no one knows him. But that's the point. It's like no one knows him. And I realized this a couple years ago too. And I tweeted something about it, and it's so funny, like the comments underneath it, people totally took it the wrong way. And I could have reframed it better, but I only have so many characters on X. So
yeah, of course. Unless you pay for premium now.
Exactly. So it's the idea is like, hey, online, there are so many people that make a lot of money. Right? They have profiles there. There's a lot of people who make money through online presence as well. But there's just online, you can find a lot of people who make a lot of money, period. there are more people who make more money who are not on social media.
Of course.
Isn't that a crazy idea?
It is, yeah.
I think that people don't understand that too often. It's like the percentage of wealthy people who exist in the United States, the percentage that don't have Instagram is higher than the ones who do.
Yeah.
I imagine, or at least are active on Instagram, I should say.
Yeah,
Facebook.
well, and it's also like there might be like 50 of the richest people in the world that we just don't know about, right? Because they're just like, they could just afford to just be gone from everything.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's kind of like when you meet somebody and you get to know them and they're really amazing and they're just like a good person.
Yeah.
And then you find out later that they're like loaded,
Yeah,
right?
exactly,
You're like, whoa, did not see that at all. Like, what the heck? That's kind of the idea.
Yeah.
And that's happened to me a couple times in my life. And those are the people who always intrigued me.
Of course.
Kind of the most. And so those are the people who I'm seeking after.
Yep.
And so a little plug here. If you know somebody, anybody who's listening, if you know someone who is wealthy, who has an amazing story, who is successful in business, whether they're wealthy or not, that has a great story and is willing to share it, please DM me. I'd love to have them on because right now I have 2 people like that. And I'm just so excited because it's funny. Like you'll hear a lot of the same stories on social media. And this is a good chance to bring something new. And again, selfish reason, I get to know some pretty amazing people that not a lot of people know, which is pretty awesome.
Exactly.
The selfless reason is, oh my gosh, how amazing is it that I have the opportunity to have an amazing conversation. I can share that with people who want to listen to it.
Yeah. And the unique part about saying that on this podcast, on the We Are the They podcast, is there are so many guys like that in this group.
Yeah.
It is
another
insane.
reason. Yeah.
Like,
open up my eyes, like, oh, but I'm just gonna say Brian Wrigley's one of them.
Wrigley.
Gosh, oh my! I remember I met him and we did this exercise where he talked a lot about his relationship with his kids and how proud of he is. I'm like, this guy's amazing. Like that is so awesome. And then I find out later all of his accolades.
You find out later the business side.
Yeah,
and
he's
it's
just
like, wow,
kidding. I'm like,
cool.
well, that kind of makes sense too. But it's really impressive that you can have both.
Exactly.
And that's what I love. I do love that about We Are the They.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love that about the idea of the podcast is bringing that to light.
Yeah, I love it, man. What else do you have for the sales entrepreneurship brand? Do you want to share anything that's next, or do you want to kind of talk about what the vision is for upcoming plans?
Yeah, so a lot of kind of ideas have been hitting me recently. The way that I do things is I take massive action and then I figure it out along the way.
Yeah, I like that.
So most of the people I know were just shocked, like after a few weeks of me doing the podcast, like, dude, you released like 6 episodes. When did you even film those? I'm like, I filmed 7 in one day.
Yeah,
and they're like,
crazy.
What? I'm like, when you're excited about something, you have
I'm at my second one and I'm already tapped out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is my 3rd one today.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like when you're excited about something, you're just able to tap into like this unlimited amount of energy, in my opinion. And so anyways, I've been figuring things out along the way. At first, I didn't know it was just the Sales Entrepreneur podcast, but I've decided now, and I've said brand a couple times, that I'm going to be forming the Sales Entrepreneur brand.
Which is awesome.
The idea is, I like the idea of anyone being able to call themselves an entrepreneur, a sales entrepreneur. That's the idea.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, I have like these little shirts that my wife made for me for Father's Day, which is awesome.
Yeah,
that's one of the things that gave me the idea. It's like, I think a lot of people would like the idea of, hey, I'm a sales entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'll probably be doing more things, like trying to be more inclusive with the people who find themselves attracted to this brand.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try to create different ways to connect with those people and to help those people more.
Exactly.
I'm like, hey, podcast is one amazing thing. I'm learning so much with this, more than I can even share on my podcast and social media, because I'm not insanely active on social media.
Yeah.
I've realized recently I'm not going to be. So yeah, I'm working on a way to be able to help people that are ready to, like I was when I met Jimmy and became a part of the We Are They group, that are ready to make actual steps towards.
Exactly. Well, and you're kind of building a community too. You're kind of building a similar community to We Are the They, right? Like I
think the community is already there.
Yeah, it is. 100%.
I mean, so many guys who are, again, business owners, 1099, something like that, who call themselves entrepreneurs, but they don't quite fit the bill of an entrepreneur. That already exists.
100%.
I'm trying to bring it together.
Yeah, no, I love that. And the podcast is a great place to start. So you're up to what, 20 episodes or so now, right?
Yeah.
You know, keep going, keep plugging away.
Yeah.
It's awesome to see. Do you have anything else before we get out of here? Any Where Are They thoughts before we get out of here? We talked a lot about you, but I want to make sure that you give love to the community, give love to the people around you.
I can't give love enough. And it's so funny too. When I was, I interviewed Jimmy I released that episode already, but it was so funny because after our thing, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to be interviewing so-and-so later. And by the way, Jimmy, like almost on every single one of my podcasts, I've brought you up and I brought up Where Are They. He's like, why do you think I encourage all of you to start a podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, genius. So I'm not kidding. On almost every single one of my podcasts, I've brought up Jimmy or Where Are They, mainly because a lot of the people who I am getting introduced to is through Jimmy. Yeah. That's one huge way that I've been meeting people, and through Where Are They.
Yeah.
And so, of course, I bring that up in the podcast.
Exactly.
But the one thing I could just say, because I'll be sharing this on my platform too, is, man, guys, the value that comes from having a mentor and a coach is amazing. The value that you get from having a group of like-minded individuals who are trying to achieve the same thing is phenomenal and really hard to achieve.
Yeah.
The value that you can get from having both a coach and mentor and an amazing group of men who have the same goal is unmatched. It's unheard of. And I've met and I've talked to a lot of people who have been part of a lot of coaching groups, and nothing like this. There is nothing like this. I consider myself extremely lucky to have found this group and being run by a guy like Jimmy as my first experience. It's just, I consider myself extremely lucky. So if you feel like you're stuck and you can't figure out a way to improve your life or to get out of a situation, you need outside help. And the best thing to do is to join a community. But it's not enough to just join the community. You have to show up.
Yes.
And you have to be willing to be vulnerable and put in the work.
Yes.
Period. If you join a community like The Tribe, like so many other ones out there, Andy Frisilla, Sean Williams, there's so many.
Yep.
It's okay. You'll learn a lot of things from listening to the speakers, but if you're not showing up, then it doesn't matter. Now, getting a coach, same thing. If you can get a coach and you're willing to show up and put in the work, that's the idea. So that's my advice for people since I've gone through this experience is like, man, that is the best way to get yourself unstuck and get yourself on a path that will change your life.
Yeah, I love that. And for Dan's audience and the people who listen to the Where Are They podcast, they know my story in detail. But the only thing I could say to everything that you just said is ditto, right? Like it is, you got to show up. And the other thing I'll add is gratitude, right? It all comes from a place of gratitude, right? We're grateful for Jimmy for starting this. We're grateful for all the other guys for being vulnerable and being open and being able to join this. We're grateful to be able to sit down and talk on a podcast with each other, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
It all comes from a place of gratitude at the end of the day. And Where Are They is just a beautiful community and a beautiful brotherhood that all centers around gratitude. So we love it.
Exactly right.
I'm grateful for you for coming on this podcast.
Thank you.
Do you want to plug? I know this is going on your podcast, but go ahead and plug your social medias and everything.
Yeah, so I just changed the name. So it's dan.sales.entrepreneur.
Perfect.
All right, so dan.sales.entrepreneur. You can also look me up, daniel.mcomber, and it'll take you to my page as well. But the Sales Entrepreneur Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, it's on all of them. So.
Awesome. Yep. Go check out this podcast. I know you're listening to it right now on his feed, but if you're listening to it on the Watt feed, go check it out. We appreciate it. Dan, love you, dude. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Love you
We'll talk to you later.
Appreciate you.